I woke up to a ceiling full of buzzing fluorescent lights and the sharp antiseptic sting that always clings to emergency rooms. For a moment, I did not know where I was or why my head felt like something had cracked open inside it. Then the monitors beside me beeped in a slow, steady rhythm, and the cold realization that I was not in my bedroom or on the staircase at the Whitmore house but in a hospital slammed into me. A woman in teal scrubs leaned over me, her voice low and careful, as if she were approaching someone standing at the edge of a cliff. "Can you hear me, Claire?" I blinked against the white glare until her face finally took shape. Brown hair pulled into a bun, fine lines around her eyes, a badge that read "Registered Nurse." Her gloved hand rested lightly on my wrist as she checked my pulse. "You are in University Medical Center in Cincinnati. You came in with a head injury." Then she asked the question that made my throat close. "Did someone hurt you?" I could not speak at first. My mind scraped backward like a car skidding across black ice, searching for an anchor. The staircase. My father above me. His voice. My back hitting wood. My skull striking the step that always creaked. For a second, the world blurred and I was not in the emergency room anymore. I was on that staircase again, reaching for a railing that was never where it should have been. I stared at the ceiling as if I could stare past it. This is exactly how my twin sister died. The words escaped before I even understood I had spoken. The nurse froze for a fraction of a second, and in that pause I felt something inside me shift. My voice returned thin and shaking, but real. My father did this before, and now he is trying again. As soon as I said it, the room felt colder, as if the truth itself had lowered the temperature. The nurse did not argue or try to smile it away. Instead, she pressed a button near the bed. A doctor appeared moments later, clipboard in hand, eyes widening slightly when he saw the swelling at my temple. "Claire, I am going to ask you some questions. I need you to stay with me." He spoke the way emergency room doctors do when they are balancing compassion with urgency. I nodded, although the motion made the room tilt. "Do you remember falling?" I remembered his hand, his voice, the words he used on Emily the night she died. "You are unstable. No one will believe you." I remembered the moment he stepped forward just enough to change my balance. I remembered gravity doing the rest. I remembered the sound my body made when it hit the steps. But the doctor did not need all of that. Not yet. I managed to whisper, "No." The nurse stepped closer. "It is all right if you do not. We have social workers on call. We have people who can help." Her voice cracked slightly on the word help, and for the first time I saw something like recognition in her eyes, as if she had met girls like me before. Girls who came in with injuries that never matched the story. Girls who learned to hide the truth inside neat sentences. Girls who were told no one would believe them. "Someone will talk with you soon," she said softly. "You are safe here." Safe. I swallowed hard. Safe was a word I had not believed in for a very long time. The room shifted again, and a second nurse adjusted my IV. My vision sharpened and blurred in waves like a camera fighting to focus. I closed my eyes for a moment and saw Emily, her hair dark and tangled from the fall, her body still on the landing. Our father insisting no one call for help until he decided what to say. The memory slammed into me with such force that I gasped. When I opened my eyes, the nurse was still watching. "Claire, can you tell me who brought you in?" Her tone was gentle but deliberate. She wanted to know if he was still nearby. I shook my head slowly. "I do not know. I woke up here. I remembered a neighbor shouting. I remembered sirens. I remembered darkness." The nurse nodded and made a note. Then she leaned closer, lowering her voice. "A social worker is on the way. We take these situations seriously. You are going to be heard." Heard. Another word I had forgotten how to trust. My father had spent years making sure my voice never mattered. The doctor asked a few more questions and then left the room, leaving me with the nurse who remained by my side, as if she understood that silence was not safe for me. My pulse pounded in my ears, and somewhere down the hall a monitor alarm echoed. A stretcher rolled past. A child cried in another room. Normal hospital sounds, but inside me, everything was unraveling. 2 years ago, they called it an accident. 2 years ago, my father stood at Emily's funeral with his hand on my shoulder and told everyone she had slipped on the stairs. 2 years ago, I believed I had lost the only person who ever protected me. And tonight, I was lying in the emergency room with a head injury that came from the same staircase and the same man. The nurse touched my shoulder gently. "Claire, is there anything else you want to tell me before the social worker arrives?" I stared up at the lights again, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. "He is still free." My voice shook, but I forced the words out anyway. "He is still free, and he knows I survived." When I said it, the nurse inhaled sharply, the first real sign of fear I had seen on her face. Not fear of me. Fear for me. That was when I realized the truth was no longer just mine. Someone finally believed me. I grew up in a house that looked ordinary from the street, a 2-story place with white siding and a porch swing that creaked in the wind, the kind of home people driving by would describe as charming or quiet or safe. But inside those walls, every memory was stitched together with the presence of my twin sister Emily. From the moment we were born, people said we shared a language of our own, a silent understanding that did not need words. Emily always seemed to know when I was frightened, and I always sensed when she was hurting, as if something deep inside us pulsed in the same rhythm. We slept in the same room until we were 12, in twin beds pushed close together, and every night she would reach across the narrow space and hook her pinky around mine before we fell asleep. When storms rattled the windows and lightning lit up the ceiling, she would whisper, "I hear it too," and somehow the thunder felt less threatening. Our house had this particular smell, a mix of old wood and lemon cleaner, and in the summers, when the heat rose through the second floor, it felt like the walls themselves were breathing. The staircase ran straight down the center of the house, 22 steps from the upper hallway to the landing, the railing made of dark polished wood that had existed longer than we had. When we were little, we used to slide down the railing, laughing so loudly our mother would come running from the kitchen to tell us to stop before one of us broke something. She never said it harshly. She said it the way mothers say things when they think their daughters will outgrow danger and innocence at the same time. After she died, everything in the house changed. My father began speaking in shorter sentences. Linda began speaking for him. The lemon cleaner smell was replaced with something colder, sharper, a scent I could never name but always recognized as the beginning of fear. Emily and I learned to move quietly, to close our doors gently, to keep track of each other's moods, because the atmosphere in the house felt like walking on ice that might crack without warning. Our father had a way of looking at us that made me want to shrink, not because he shouted or hit us, but because he held every room as if he owned all the air inside it. He called it discipline. Emily called it control. She whispered to me once late at night that there are ways to hurt someone that never show on their skin. I remember nodding even though I did not fully understand. The staircase became the center of our world. It was the first thing we saw every morning and the last thing we touched every night. The railing was smooth beneath our palms, worn by decades of hands, but Emily once pointed to the base where one of the screws looked different and said, "Dad keeps adjusting that." When I asked why, she frowned and said, "I don't know. Maybe it is nothing." But her voice was too careful, too quiet, as if the words themselves might slip. Our father feared messes. He feared things he could not control. He repeated the same phrase every time something fell or shattered or went wrong. "People fall all the time." He said it when Emily slipped on the kitchen tile and bruised her knee. He said it when I tripped on the front steps carrying groceries. He said it when our mother fell ill and never recovered, and he said it so often that the words started to feel like a warning rather than comfort. Emily was the brave one. She confronted him more than I ever dared, not loudly, not in ways that could be called disrespectful, but in measured glances and questions that carried sharp edges. She told him once that the railing felt loose again, and instead of checking it, he stared at her for a long time, then said, "Maybe you should be more careful." I remember the way her shoulders stiffened, the way her hand twitched at her side, as if she were holding back 1,000 things she wanted to say. She waited until he walked away before she whispered to me, "I do not like the way he watches us near the stairs." I told myself she was imagining things because that was easier than considering she might be right. The truth was that the house changed shape around our father. When he entered a room, the air grew heavy. When he climbed the stairs, every step seemed louder than it should have been. When Linda moved in, she matched his rhythm so seamlessly it was as if she had studied it. She cleaned the house with a silent intensity, straightening frames, dusting shelves, adjusting curtains, always smoothing over the places where reality might show. She called it keeping order, but Emily called it erasing evidence. There was a moment when I should have known something was deeply wrong, but memory has a way of blurring what you do not want to see. Emily was standing at the top of the stairs holding a basket of laundry. I was in the hallway brushing my hair. Our father stepped behind her and asked a simple question about dinner. Emily turned slightly to answer. For a second, she lost her balance, the basket shifting in her arms. I watched her reach for the railing, watched her fingers slip where the wood dipped just enough to throw off her grip. She caught herself, her breath sharp in her throat. Our father said people fall all the time and walked away. That night, she told me I felt like I was standing on the edge of something and he knew it. She looked at me with a fear I had never seen in her eyes before. Promise me if anything ever happens to me, you will not let it be called an accident. I told her nothing would happen. I promised without understanding the weight of the promise. I promised because the alternative was unbearable. The house held every secret. The floors creaked in all the same places. The windows rattled in their frames during storms. The railing was always polished, always shining, always just slightly loose in a way that made sense only if you stopped trusting your own senses. Sometimes late at night, Emily and I would sit on the top step, our feet tucked beneath us, whispering about leaving someday. She wanted to move to Chicago to study physical therapy, to live in an apartment with a balcony where she could drink coffee in the morning sun. I wanted to follow her anywhere. We promised that one day we would walk out of the Whitmore house together and never look back. But the house had its own hunger. It kept us close. It kept us quiet. It kept us believing that our father was strong and steady and incapable of the darkness we only saw in glimpses. I used to think grief began the day Emily died, but the truth is, it began long before. It began the moment I first saw fear in her eyes. It began when she reached for the railing and missed. It began every time our father repeated people fall all the time. The house was supposed to protect us. Instead, it taught us that safety could be staged and danger could be disguised as ordinary life. And now, lying in the emergency room with my head throbbing and my memory fractured, I realized the truth that had been circling me for years. Emily was not wrong, and she was not imagining anything. We had both been standing on the same edge. She fell first. I just happened to survive long enough to tell it. Growing up, I learned early that there were two versions of my father, and the world adored the one that never lived inside our home. To neighbors, he was Richard Whitmore, the man who trimmed his hedges every Saturday morning, waved at passing cars, and helped elderly couples bring their groceries inside. To co-workers, he was the steady man in a crisp shirt who never raised his voice and always volunteered for charity drives. To the church congregation, he was the grieving widower who lost his wife too young, yet still showed up every Sunday with a gentle smile and two quiet daughters at his side. People said he was patient, strong, respectable, the kind of father any girl would be lucky to have. They said these things because they only saw what he allowed them to see. Inside the Whitmore house, the version of my father that everyone praised flickered and vanished like a light that had burned out long ago. He never hit us, not once, and that was the detail he relied on more than anything. He did not need fists. He used silence that stretched so long it cut deeper than yelling ever could. He used looks that froze your insides. He used a tone so calm it made you question whether the fear twisting in your stomach was even real. Linda reinforced all of this with the smooth precision of someone who knew exactly which mask to wear and when. She would smile politely in front of guests, placing her hand on my father's arm as if they were the picture of stability, then close the door after they left and exhale in a way that told me her patience was nothing more than a staged performance. She had moved into the house a year after my mother's death, and from the beginning she took over the social script. She answered the door. She organized holiday dinners. She wrote thank you cards. She made sure the image stayed flawless. People trusted her effortlessly, especially older women at church who whispered that she was a blessing because she stepped in and helped raise two troubled daughters. They called her kind. They called her selfless. Only Emily and I saw the truth behind her eyes, the calculating way she watched my father for cues, adjusting her tone to match his smoothing out any edges that might disrupt the story they had built together. Emily said once that Linda acted like the director of a play that only had the two of them in starring roles, and the rest of us served only as props. I laughed at the time because it sounded dramatic. Now it feels like one of the truest things my sister ever said. What made it even harder was how convincingly my father played the role of the honorable man. When he attended work events, he shook hands with an easy confidence. When neighbors hosted barbecues, he stood near the grill giving advice on charcoal placement, as if small talk were a natural language to him. He donated to local fundraisers and volunteered for community watch patrols. He coached a little league team even though Emily and I had no interest in baseball. Everyone saw him as involved and compassionate. They did not see the tension that filled the house when the front door closed each night. They did not see the way he counted every light left on or every dish out of place. They did not see the look in his eyes when he found a towel folded incorrectly, the same look that made Emily freeze and twist her fingers together until the knuckles turned white. My father believed in order a kind that felt less like structure and more like surveillance. He kept a copy of every utility bill filed alphabetically. He locked the cabinets where important documents were stored. He kept the keys on a ring he never left unattended. He tracked how many miles were driven on the family car and questioned any number he did not like. Some fathers ask how their daughters' days were. Mine asked why the gas tank was lower than it had been yesterday. Some men worry about safety. Mine worried about control. The strangest part was how others treated him as a source of wisdom. People asked him for advice on parenting marriage finances. They said he had endured so much yet remained unshaken. They told him he was a pillar. I watched their admiration like someone watching rain fall through a window, unable to touch it, unable to feel what they felt. Their praise only made the dissonance sharper, because when they described him as steady and protective, I could still hear Emily's voice whispering late at night that she did not feel safe walking past him on the stairs. Whenever anyone mentioned how patient he was, I remembered the way he had made us stand perfectly still in the hallway while he inspected the house for anything out of place. If he found even a single speck of dust, he said disappointment without raising his voice. His control was subtle, and that was what made it effective. There were no bruises to photograph, no injuries to report, nothing that could be labeled as abuse by people who believed abuse needed to come with obvious marks. All we had were feelings, but feelings can be dismissed. All we had were uneasy instincts, but instincts can be overwritten. All we had were the looks he gave us and the way we shrank from them, which outsiders interpreted as teenage anxiety or emotional fragility. They told us we were lucky to have a father who cared. They said this while I fought the urge to run out the door, and Emily clenched her jaw so tight I was afraid her teeth would crack. I remember once when a teacher called the house because Emily had been distracted in class. My father thanked her warmly, apologized for any trouble, and promised to speak with Emily. When he hung up the phone, the warmth drained from his face like someone had pulled a plug. He called Emily into the living room and asked if she thought it was appropriate to embarrass him in front of people who respected him. He spoke so quietly that I had to strain to hear, but every syllable carried the weight of a punishment he never had to name. Emily told me later she felt like her lungs had stopped working. I told her she should tell someone. She asked who. I had no answer. That was the power he held. He built a reputation so spotless that anyone who doubted it looked irrational. Even when Emily died, he held the world in the palm of his hand. People brought casseroles and flowers. They hugged him with sympathetic tears. They said things like, "You have endured too much and you are so strong." No one noticed that he cried only when someone else was in the room. Linda orchestrated every detail of the funeral, choosing the readings, arranging the flowers, managing the guest list. She took me aside and said, "Your father needs to be protected right now. His heart is fragile. Protect him," as if I were the danger, as if Emily were the mistake. Standing beside Emily's closed casket, I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the quiet panic that grew whenever truth and performance collided. My father lowered his head and covered his eyes with his hand in what looked like grief. People touched his back and whispered prayers. I stared at him, trying to reconcile the man they saw with the one who had told Emily people fall all the time. The one who insisted no medical examiner needed to look deeper. the one who never let me ask questions. He played the devastated father so well that even I started doubting what I felt. That was what he wanted. That was how he kept control. And that was why no one ever suspected him when he walked away from that funeral with dry eyes behind his hands and the quiet satisfaction of a man whose truth had been accepted without challenge. The night Emily fell lives inside me the way a cold wind lives in the bones long after winter has passed, a memory that never softens, no matter how many times I try to retell it, because the truth is that it did not feel like a single moment. It felt like a series of quiet warnings that none of us understood until it was too late. I remember the way the house sounded that evening, the strange stillness that settled over the walls, the kind of quiet that makes you feel as though the house itself is holding its breath. Linda had spent the afternoon cleaning with a fury that made every surface shine, moving from room to room with a rag in her hand and a tight smile on her face. My father had been pacing downstairs, checking window locks, adjusting picture frames, turning lights on and off as if searching for something he could not name. Emily had been restless too, her shoulders tense beneath her sweater, her hands trembling slightly, though she kept them hidden in her sleeves. We were 17, but felt older, weighed down by a heaviness that had no shape and no explanation. It started with a fight, although calling it a fight makes it sound larger than it was. It was more of an argument that existed in the space between spoken words, a tension that gathered like a storm cloud. Our father had asked Emily about a college application she had forgotten to show him. She told him she had not forgotten, she simply had not decided whether she wanted his help. His expression did not change, but something in the room tilted as if gravity had shifted. He asked why she believed she could make decisions without consulting him. She said in a quiet voice that she was almost an adult and needed to choose her own path. Linda stepped into the doorway, her eyes darting between them, her smile brittle as glass. She said, "Now is not the time for defiance. My father said discipline matters in this house." Emily said control is not discipline. His eyes hardened. Mine did too. I stood at the top of the staircase listening, unable to make myself move because arguments in the Whitmore house had a way of turning into something sharper, something brittle, something that felt like a trap closing. Emily walked past him, then closing the distance between the living room and the staircase. Her chin raised the way she did when she refused to shrink even though she was shaking inside. Our father followed a few steps behind her, silent, calm, too calm. When he was that calm, it felt like the world around us went quiet, as if waiting for him to decide what it would sound like next. Emily reached the top step and paused, turning to face him. I could see them both from where I stood in the hallway, the railing only a foot away from her hand. "She said we are not little anymore. We can choose our lives. We do not need permission from you to breathe," he replied with a voice so smooth it made my skin crawl. People fall all the time. I do not know if she realized then what he meant. Sometimes I think she did. Sometimes I think she always knew she was standing on the edge of something dangerous. She turned slightly, maybe to walk away, maybe to pick up the laundry basket sitting just inside our bedroom. The motion was small, so small it should not have mattered. But my father stepped forward, not a shove, not enough for anyone outside that house to call violence, just a shift of weight, a presence closing in. His foot moved toward the base of the railing, the place Emily had always said felt wrong. She reached for the rail, her fingers brushing the polished wood, and in the split second before she lost her balance, I saw her eyes widen, not in shock, but in recognition. It was the same look she had given me once when she said Dad keeps adjusting that screw. Her finger slipped, the railing dipped, she gasped, her breath catching like a broken string. Then her body tilted. It felt like watching time fracture. She did not scream. The sound she made was soft, a breath more than a cry, but I heard it in a way that tore through my chest. I lunged forward, reaching for her even though I was too far away to catch her. I remember the moment her foot missed the step, the moment gravity decided for her, the moment her body turned twisting helplessly as she fell. She hit the fourth step with her shoulder. She hit the landing with her head. The sound of it was not cinematic or dramatic. It was blunt and final and stolen from every nightmare I never knew I had. I screamed her name, my voice ripping through the hallway, but my father did not move. Linda appeared in the doorway below, just as Emily collapsed into stillness. Her hands flew to her mouth, but her eyes did not show surprise, only calculation. I scrambled down the stairs, nearly tripping in my desperation, reaching Emily's side, touching her hair, her cheek, my fingers shaking as I whispered, "Emily, wake up, please. Wake up, please. Open your eyes. Please breathe." My father stood on the top step looking down with a measured stare, and in that moment I understood something I could never unlearn. He was already building the story in his head. He walked down slowly, too slowly, and said what happened in a voice that sounded like a man discovering a tragedy rather than standing inside one. I shouted at him to call for help. He did not. He knelt beside Emily as if examining her and said in a tone so quiet it made my blood turn cold, "She is gone." I pushed his hand away and said, "Call 911. He said she must have slipped. Linda touched his arm and said she lost her balance. "Richard, it was an accident." Accident. The word tasted like poison. I reached for my phone, but he caught my wrist, not hard, not in a way that would bruise, just firm enough to stop me. He said we should not involve anyone just yet. Let her rest. She is gone. I yanked my arm away and screamed at him, but it was already too late. Emily lay motionless at the bottom of the stairs. Her hair spread across the wood like dark water, her eyes half open and unfocused. I touched her cheek again, and her skin felt like it was drifting away from the world. I whispered, "I am here, I am here, I am here," but I knew even then that she could not hear me. When the paramedics finally arrived, they tried to revive her, but their eyes told me the truth before their words did. They asked what happened, and my father answered first, saying she slipped and fell down the stairs while carrying laundry. He said it with such steady certainty that the paramedics nodded sympathetically. No one questioned him. Why would they? He was the trusted father, the respectable man, the pillar of the community. I wanted to scream he did this, but the words would not come. They lodged in my throat, heavy as wet rope, impossible to pull free. At the hospital, the medical examiner wrote "accidental fall" on the report. My father thanked him. Linda cried delicate tears into a tissue. I sat in a hard plastic chair, staring at my hands, wondering why they were not shaking anymore, wondering why I felt hollow instead of hysterical, wondering why no one else saw what I had seen. At the funeral, my father insisted on a closed casket. He said her injuries were too severe, that it would be better for everyone to remember her as she was. People nodded. People said he was strong. People said fate was cruel. I stood beside her coffin with a pressure in my chest so crushing I could not breathe. Emily had once told me if anything ever happens, do not let them call it an accident. I could not keep that promise. Not then. Not when the world believed him, and not me. And as I watched her coffin lowered into the earth, I felt something inside me fracture in a way that could never be repaired. But the worst part was not the sound of soil hitting the lid or the sight of my father drying tears that never quite reached his eyes. The worst part was the quiet voice in my mind whispering something I had been too afraid to admit. He did not lose control that night. He never lost control. He created it. He wanted it. And now he had perfected the story so well that even I began to wonder whether the truth could ever survive him. The 2 years after Emily died did not feel like time passing. They felt like a long, narrow hallway with no windows and no doors, a place where sound could not travel and light could not enter, a place I walked through every day without ever reaching an end. People said grief changes you, but what they did not tell me was that silence changes you more. Silence becomes a habit. Silence becomes a cage. Silence becomes the language you speak when the truth is too dangerous to say out loud. After the funeral, I tried to leave the Whitmore house. I packed a small suitcase, just clothes and personal papers, and stood at the top of the stairs staring down at the railing that had taken Emily from me, the same railing that gleamed under the hallway light as if nothing had happened. I remember gripping the handle of my suitcase so hard that my knuckles turned white. I remember telling myself that if I walked down those stairs and out the front door, I might survive. But before I could take a single step, my father appeared behind me. He stood close enough that I could feel the heat of his presence at my back. He asked where I thought I was going. I said I needed air. He said that running away would only make things harder. He said he understood my grief, that he wanted to help me heal, that I should not make rash decisions while my mind was clouded. He spoke so gently that I almost believed him, and when he told me he needed to keep my important documents safe until I was thinking clearly, I handed them over. My birth certificate, my social security card, my bank information. He locked them in the cabinet he kept in his study and said he would return them when the time was right. The time never became right. Linda watched everything with an expression that looked like sympathy but never reached her eyes. She told me that my father was just worried about me, that he feared losing another daughter, and that I should trust him because he only wanted what was best for our family. Family. That word felt like a rope tightening around my throat. I returned to my room that night and stared at the empty bed across from mine. Emily's pillow was still there, untouched, the indentation from her head still faintly visible. I sat on the floor and cried silently, the kind of crying that has no sound because making sound would feel like betrayal. The next morning, I woke up early and told myself I would try again. I would leave. I would run. But when I opened my door, my father was already standing in the hallway holding a mug of coffee, acting as though this was a normal morning in a normal house. He said he had made breakfast. He said he hoped I would join them. His voice never raised, but his eyes told me what his words did not. Leaving was not an option. The days stretched into weeks, and the weeks stretched into months. I tried once to retrieve my documents from the locked cabinet, but the key was always in my father's pocket. Whenever I asked, he said, "You are not ready for that responsibility, or you need stability more than independence right now." He said these things with a calm authority that made my questions sound irrational. Linda reinforced his narrative with soft sighs and the occasional gentle touch on my arm as she said, "We know what is best for you, Claire. You need structure. You need guidance. You are still grieving." I wanted to scream that grief did not feel like this. Grief did not feel like being watched every time I moved. Grief did not feel like asking permission to go to the grocery store. Grief did not feel like having my phone checked under the guise of safety. Grief did not feel like being told I was forgetful when my belongings disappeared, or clumsy when objects in the house shifted position without explanation. This was not grief. This was erasure. And yet I stayed because leaving without identification or money felt impossible, and because part of me still believed that speaking the truth would only make things worse. I enrolled in community college for medical billing and coding using the small scholarship Emily and I had planned to share. My father insisted on driving me to and from campus. Linda packed lunches for me with notes that said, "We love you and you are healing beautifully." At school, I sat in the back of the room and kept my voice low. I learned about insurance forms and procedural codes and claims processing. I learned how to navigate hospital systems and paperwork skills that would later keep me alive. But the most important thing I learned was how to disappear in plain sight. The instructors said I was quiet but hard-working. Classmates invited me to study groups, but I rarely went because my father said staying out late was unsafe. He said the world was full of threats. He never said that he was one of them. Sometimes in the middle of class, I would feel a pressure behind my ribs, a sudden memory of Emily laughing beside me, of her nudging my shoulder, of her whispering answers during tests. The ache would come so suddenly that I would have to excuse myself and stand in the hallway until I could breathe again. Everyone thought it was grief. No one suspected fear. I moved into a small apartment after graduation, but even then my father remained present in ways that felt like shadows stretching across my door. He kept a copy of my apartment key. He visited unannounced. He commented on how tidy or untidy the space looked. He asked how many hours I worked each week and why my bank balance was lower than he expected. He spoke as if my life were a ledger he had authority over. Linda called often with reminders about family dinners and holidays, always phrased as obligations. Whenever I tried to decline, she said, "You know how much your father needs you." The truth was that he did not need me. He needed control. And every time I started to pull away, he found a way to tighten the rope a little more. The silence between us grew thicker, heavier, something we all carried but never acknowledged. I avoided the staircase at the house, refusing to walk near it whenever I visited, even though I told myself I was being irrational. My father noticed. He asked if I was afraid of falling too. He said it with a smile that chilled me. People fall all the time. The words repeated in my mind like an old song I could not shut off. I told myself I was imagining the threat beneath them. I told myself the danger had passed. But the truth was that danger never left the Whitmore house. It simply waited. And during those 2 years of silence while I tried to convince myself that the worst was behind me, I failed to see the truth that had been circling me all along. He was not finished. It started slowly, so slowly that for a while I convinced myself I was imagining everything that grief can twist. Memory that trauma can make ordinary moments feel dangerous. But denial is a fragile shield, and mine shattered the day I walked back into the Whitmore house for the first time in months and felt the air shift in a way I had not felt since the night Emily died. I remember standing in the entryway holding a bag of groceries I had promised to deliver because Linda said she was not feeling well, and the moment the door closed behind me, I sensed something wrong. Something subtle but unmistakable. The staircase looked the same as always. Polished wood gleaming beneath the hallway light, but when I placed my hand on the railing to steady myself, I felt it move. Not much, not enough for a visitor to notice, but enough for my memory to jolt so violently that my fingers trembled. The railing had been replaced after Emily died, or so my father said, but the loose dip beneath my palm felt identical to the one she had pointed out years before. I pulled my hand away as if burned. My father appeared in the doorway of his study with that familiar calm smile, asking if I had just arrived, as if the question were not rhetorical, as if he had not heard the door open seconds earlier. I said Linda had asked for groceries. He stepped closer, took the bag from me and said, "That was thoughtful, Claire." His tone was too soft to trust. I nodded and forced myself to look anywhere except the stairs. He said he had been meaning to show me some things he had fixed around the house and gestured toward the staircase. My stomach tightened. I said I was in a hurry. He said it would not take long. His voice never rose yet. Something in it coiled around me like a command disguised as courtesy. I backed away and pretended I needed to get back to work. His eyes lingered on me for a moment too long. He said, "Be careful on your way out. People fall all the time." I did not breathe until I reached my car. I told myself it was only a sentence, only a coincidence, only my mind replaying old terror. But fear is a persistent messenger, and it soon brought more evidence. I came home one evening to find my apartment door slightly open, not enough to suggest forced entry, but enough for goosebumps to rise across my arms. Inside, nothing was broken, nothing was missing. Nothing was obviously disturbed, but the air felt wrong, as if someone had been there only minutes before. I checked my drawers, my closet, my documents, all seemingly untouched, yet I could not shake the feeling that someone had sifted through my life like pages in a book. I told myself I must have forgotten to lock the door, but I never forgot to lock the door. The next day, I found my spare key missing from the small tin where I kept it. I searched everywhere, even inside shoes and pockets I had not worn in months. It was gone. My father had a copy. Linda did too. My pulse would not slow. That night as I showered, I heard a faint click from the front door, a sound I almost dismissed until I realized the water had masked it. I stepped out of the shower, dripping onto the floor, holding my breath. Nothing else moved. The door was closed. The lock looked untouched. I stood there wrapped in a towel, feeling like I had been dropped back into the old house, into the silence before things went wrong. The next morning, I called the apartment manager and had my locks changed. When I told my father purely out of obligation, he said that was unnecessary, Claire, but if it makes you feel better, then fine. He said it with clipped politeness, but the muscle along his jaw twitched, betraying something he did not want me to see. A week later, Linda called asking if I could stop by the house to pick up a casserole dish I had left there. I knew I had never brought a casserole dish to their house. I told her I would come by another time. She insisted, saying it was important because she needed it for a church event. Her voice wavered on the word needed, as though she were reciting a line someone had coached her to say. I drove to the house anyway because fear can twist logic, and I wanted proof that nothing was wrong. When I walked inside, the first thing I noticed was the faint smell of sawdust, the kind you smell when wood has recently been sanded or drilled. Linda was in the kitchen pretending to organize drawers that did not need organizing. I asked where the casserole dish was. She pointed to the dining room table, but when I picked it up, I saw dust on the rim dust that suggested it had not been moved in months. I set it down slowly and asked whether something had been repaired in the house recently because I noticed a smell. She froze for a fraction of a second, then smiled too quickly and said, "Oh, that your father fixed a few loose screws on the staircase railing this morning." Her voice cracked on the word fixed. My fingertips went cold. I walked toward the staircase even as every instinct in my body screamed, "Stop!" The railing looked normal, but when I pressed down gently, I felt the same shift I had felt days earlier. It was subtle but intentional. Railings do not loosen themselves. They do not tighten themselves. They do not move unless someone wants them to move. I turned to Linda. She would not meet my eyes. Instead, she said, "Your father has been under stress. Claire, do not upset him." I asked why she would think I would upset him unless there was something to be upset about. She told me I was imagining things again. Imagining. The word echoed from years earlier, from the day Emily first told them something was wrong. "You are imagining things" had been my father's refrain, a weapon meant to distort truth until even reality felt blurry. I left the house without the casserole dish. My hands shook so hard I could barely put the key into the ignition. That night I lay awake listening to every creak of my apartment building, every footstep in the hallway, every elevator door closing. Hypervigilance is a strange companion because it whispers both warnings and lies, and I tried to ignore it until the next morning when I received a text from an unknown number that said accidents can happen anywhere. No signature, no punctuation, just the sentence that lived at the center of my nightmares. I deleted the message and told myself it could be spam, even though no spam message had ever felt so personal. I went to work and tried to lose myself in medical codes and billing charts, but my hands trembled every time the phone rang. When I arrived home that evening, the hallway outside my door smelled faintly like my father's cologne. Not strong enough to be obvious, but enough to trigger a memory of him standing too close on the staircase, his voice calm, his eyes unblinking. I called the police and reported the text anonymously. They said without a threat or identifiable sender, there was nothing they could do. They said to call again if something else happened. Something else did. I visited the Whitmore house again a week later, determined to prove to myself that the railing was safe and that my fear was only the echo of an old wound. Instead, I found my father standing at the top of the stairs, holding a screwdriver tightening something I could not see. He turned when he heard me and smiled with a softness so practiced it felt like a performance. He said, "Just keeping things in order, Claire." I tried to smile back, but my throat closed. For a moment, we stood there in silence, him above me below the railing between us like a thin, unspoken threat. Then he said, "You look tired. Maybe you should sit." I stepped backward. He watched me closely, so closely that I felt suddenly exposed. Linda appeared behind him clutching a dish towel, her face pale, her voice too bright as she said, "Dinner is ready." But the tension between us remained thick, like humidity before a storm. That night at home, I opened my laptop and began writing everything I had noticed, not recordings, not photographs, just notes, patterns, behaviors, details that my mind kept trying to dismiss. I wrote about the railing dip. I wrote about the door left ajar. I wrote about the text. I wrote about the screwdriver in his hand. I stopped only when I realized my hands were shaking so badly that I could barely type. I sat there staring at the screen and finally admitted the truth I had been trying to outrun. It was happening again. He was doing it again. And this time, I was the one standing at the top of the stairs. The night before I woke up in the emergency room began like so many others with the kind of uneasy silence that coils through a house long before anything actually happens, a silence that feels like a warning if you have lived through enough danger to recognize the shape of it. I had not planned to visit the Whitmore house that evening, but Linda called at 7 and said, "Your father wants to see you." Her voice too rehearsed, too steady a voice that made my stomach twist. Because whenever she delivered his messages, she sounded like someone reading lines under threat. I told her I had work in the morning and could not stay long. She said it would only take a few minutes. I knew then that I should have said no, that I should have trusted the unease crawling up my spine. But guilt is a powerful leash, and fear, disguised as obligation, pulled me back into the house that had nearly swallowed my sister whole. When I arrived, the living room lights were already on, though the curtains were drawn tight, as if the house itself did not want witnesses. Linda was in the kitchen wiping the same countertop over and over. My father stood at the bottom of the staircase with one hand resting lightly on the railing, not gripping it, just touching it the way someone touches a familiar instrument they know how to play. He greeted me with a calmness that felt like ice water on skin. He asked how work was. He asked whether I was taking care of myself. He asked if I was sleeping enough. Each question sounded like concern, but felt like surveillance. I said everything was fine. I asked why he wanted to see me. He smiled faintly and said, "We have not talked in a while, Claire." His voice was smooth, practiced, a voice he used with neighbors and coworkers, but beneath it I heard something else, something old and sharpened. He gestured toward the kitchen as if to offer me tea. I said I could not stay long. He said, "Of course, but we should talk privately." He motioned toward the staircase. My breath caught in my throat so suddenly I had to swallow hard to keep from choking on air. I said, "We can talk here." He said upstairs is quieter. Linda stood frozen with her hands in the sink, staring at the water as if afraid to turn around. I backed away from the staircase instinctively, a tiny movement, but his eyes tracked it with chilling precision. He said, "You act like you are afraid of me, Claire." He said it with mild amusement, as though the idea were ridiculous. I said I was not afraid. My voice wavered. He heard it. The amusement faded. He stepped toward me with slow, patient steps, the kind that remind you he is not hurrying because he does not need to, because control is a luxury he has never had to fight for. I moved backward until I reached the far side of the living room. He stopped a few feet away and tilted his head the way he used to when he corrected us as children. He said, "I think your mind is playing tricks on you again." I said, "I do not know what you are talking about." He said, "You imagine danger where there is none. You always have." Linda dried her hands and finally turned around. She said, "Your father only wants to help you, Claire." I stared at her and saw the fear trembling inside her voice, even though she tried to bury it. She was not supporting him. She was surviving him. And yet, she would not save me. My father took another step closer. I could smell the faint cologne I had smelled outside my apartment door. He said, "You have been telling stories, Claire. Dangerous stories." I felt my pulse hammering. I asked what stories. He said about the house, about the railing, about me. He said them in a tone that made each word feel like a verdict. I said, "I have not told anyone anything." He smiled slowly. He said, "Not yet." His quiet certainty turned my bones to ice. I took a small step to the side. He mirrored it. I said, "I need to go." He said, "No, you do not." His voice was still soft, but it carried the weight of a wall closing in. I tried to move toward the front door, but he stepped into my path with a speed that did not match his calm expression. He said, "We are going to settle this tonight." My throat tightened so hard I struggled to breathe. Linda whispered, "Richard, please." He did not look at her. He said Claire and nodded toward the staircase as if expecting obedience. I said no. It was the first time I had ever said it without stuttering. His eyes darkened not with rage, but with calculation. He said, "You sound unstable," the same sentence he used on Emily, the same tone, the same rhythm. My chest seized. I turned toward the front door again, but he reached for my arm. His grip was not violent, but firm, a grip that said, "Do not make me do more." I yanked my arm free and stumbled back. He stepped toward me again, shepherding me exactly where he wanted me to go. Every step I took away from him brought me closer to the staircase behind me. I felt the railing brush my spine, the same railing he had been adjusting, the same dip beneath the wood that haunted every memory since Emily died. I said, "Stay away from me." My voice cracked, but I forced it out. He said, "You need help, Claire. You have always needed help." His tone was gentle, patronizing, cruel. I said, "I am leaving." He said, "Not while you are like this." His hand lifted slightly as if to calm me, but I knew the gesture. I had seen it the night Emily fell. I felt my body tremble. When I glanced past him, I saw Linda clutching the counter, her face bone white. She whispered, "Please stop," but he ignored her completely as though she were a piece of furniture rather than a person. I sidestepped fast, trying to dart around him toward the dining room, but he intercepted me with frightening ease, stepping exactly where he needed to stand so that I had only one direction left to move. Backward, toward the stairs. He said you are imagining things, Claire. You always have. He lifted his hand slightly again, not touching me, only guiding the moment. I stumbled back a step. My heel hit the top stair. He said, "Everyone knows you have been under strain." His voice lowered. No one would question it. The sentence hit me like a blow. No one would question it. He had spoken those words before. Not to me. To Emily. My breath came fast and shallow. I said, "Do not come closer." He took one more slow step toward me. The space between us was thin enough that I could feel his presence pressing forward like a tide. The railing behind me felt loose beneath my fingertips. He said, "Accidents happen, Claire." There was no anger in his voice, only certainty. Cold, unshakable certainty. I tried to step sideways again, but the heel of my shoe slipped against the polished wood. My body jerked. My hand grabbed the railing. It dipped exactly the way it had the night Emily fell. My stomach dropped. I felt the world tilt. His eyes stayed on mine, and for a split second everything froze the air, my heartbeat the faint hum of the overhead light. Then gravity took me. I felt my feet slide. My balance vanished. The back of my leg caught the top step. My hand slipped off of the railing entirely. The world spun sideways. I remember the sensation of falling more than the fall itself, the way breath leapt out of my chest, the way panic rose so fast it felt like fire, the way my mind screamed no, even though my voice never made a sound. I hit the seventh step with my hips so hard that pain burst through me like shattering glass. My shoulder slammed into the next step. My head struck the landing with a sharp crack that echoed inside my skull. For a moment, I could not see. For a moment, I could not think. I tried to move, but my limbs felt like water. Somewhere above me, I heard Linda scream. Somewhere above that, I heard my father say she fell. His voice was steady. Too steady. I tried to lift my head, but the room tilted and blurred. Pain radiated through my skull. My vision darkened around the edges. From far away, I heard another sound, a neighbor's voice shouting, "Is everything all right?" Then the slam of a door. Then footsteps. Linda cried out, "Call 911! My father said she needs a minute." His tone was almost irritated, like I had inconvenienced him. The neighbor shouted again, this time louder, asking, "Should I call?" Linda screamed, "Yes." I tried to speak, but my tongue felt thick, my throat tight. The world darkened further. I felt myself slipping into the same void Emily had slipped into, and terror surged through me so violently that I tried to claw my way back to consciousness. I remember thinking, not like this, not again, not him, not here. The last thing I saw before everything collapsed into black was my father standing at the top of the staircase, looking down at me with the same calm, unreadable expression he had worn the night Emily fell, the expression of a man who believed the story was already written, who believed he would walk away clean once again. And then there was nothing. When consciousness finally returned, it did not arrive gently. It clawed its way up through layers of darkness with the sharp persistence of someone banging on a locked door. I opened my eyes to the white glow of overhead fluorescent lights, and the distant hiss of oxygen, the soft shuffle of nurses moving quickly yet quietly, and the steady pulse of a monitor tracking my heartbeat. For a long moment, I did not know where I was or who had brought me there. My skull throbbed with a deep, blunt ache that felt older than the fall itself. I tried to lift my hand, but the IV tugged at my skin. A nurse appeared beside me, her face warm but cautious, and she said gently, "Claire, you are in the emergency department at University Medical Center. You came in with a head injury and a fall." A fall. The word crashed through my mind like a siren. Images flickered in broken fragments. The railing. My father's eyes. The moment gravity stole the ground from beneath me. Emily's body on the landing. My throat tightened so sharply that I could barely breathe. The nurse asked, "Can you tell me what happened?" I tried to speak, but my mouth felt dry like paper. When my voice finally emerged, it sounded far away. I fell. That was all I could manage because fear wrapped around the truth like a fist. The nurse nodded slowly, but her eyes lingered on the bruise forming along my jaw, the red marks near my arm, the pattern of injuries that did not fit a simple slip on the stairs. She glanced at the doctor who entered moments later, a calm, older man with graying hair who spoke in a tone that suggested he had seen more human suffering than he wished to admit. He asked if I could follow his finger with my eyes. I did. He asked if I remembered losing consciousness. I did not. He asked if I had fallen before. The question felt like a knife slicing open old memories, and I forced myself to swallow the panic rising in my chest. The doctor exchanged a look with the nurse. Then he asked the question that turned the entire room into a pressure chamber. "Claire, did someone hurt you?" My heart jolted. The room felt smaller. The walls tilted slightly as if the entire world had shifted. I opened my mouth, but no words came. My breath trembled visibly. The doctor's expression softened, but his voice remained steady. "Claire, this is a standard screening. We ask all patients with injuries like yours. You are safe here." Those last 3 words cracked something open inside me. Safe! I could not remember the last time I had felt that. Tears burned behind my eyes as I whispered, "I do not know." The nurse stepped closer. "It is all right. You can take your time. A social worker is on her way." Social worker. The phrase hit me with the force of truth. They suspected domestic violence. They saw what I had been afraid to see in myself. My father would have laughed at the idea. He would have called it dramatic, imagining things. But the bruises did not lie. The fear did not lie. My memory did not lie. A few minutes later, a police officer in uniform arrived at the foot of my bed. He was polite but professional, his notebook already in hand. He introduced himself and said we received a call about a possible disturbance at your family's residence. I tried to push myself upright, but pain flared down the side of my ribs. The officer saw me wince and said, "You do not need to move. I just need you to tell me what you remember." I took a breath and the air felt thick. I remembered too much and not enough. I remembered the railing dipping. I remembered his voice saying accidents happen. I remembered my own scream trapped inside my skull. But the moment I imagined saying my father pushed me, my throat closed. What if no one believed me? What if he convinced them I was unstable like he had always said? What if reporting him made everything worse? The officer asked again, gently, "Claire, do you recall how you fell?" My chest tightened, my fingers dug into the blanket. I said I fell down the stairs. He paused. Then he asked, "Was anyone else home?" "My father." My voice cracked. "And Linda." He asked, did either of them witness the fall? The question felt like a trick of fate, an opportunity disguised as danger. I could tell the truth or hide it. I hesitated too long. The officer wrote something in his notebook. He asked if I felt unsafe going back to that house. I whispered yes before I could stop myself. His eyes softened. Then he asked, "Do you believe your fall was an accident?" The truth rose like a scream inside me, but my throat refused to release it. Years of conditioning held my voice hostage. I whispered, "I do not know." It was the safest lie I could manage. The officer nodded and said we have started a preliminary report. The hospital will file a mandatory suspected domestic violence documentation because of your injuries. That does not mean anyone gets arrested tonight, but it means this incident will not disappear. My breath hitched. No arrest. Not tonight. Not enough evidence. Not enough certainty. Not enough truth. Fear flooded me. If my father learned police had come, he would not wait another 2 years before trying again. The officer continued speaking, saying we will follow up in the next few days. Please answer if we call, and if you feel threatened at any point, dial 911 immediately. When he left the room, I felt both relief and terror. Relief that someone finally saw danger. Terror that my father was still free. The social worker arrived next, a woman in her 50s with a gentle face and steady hands. She sat beside my bed and said, "Claire, I want to understand what happened tonight. You do not need to prove anything right now. You only need to be honest with yourself." The words almost broke me. I told her that the fall felt familiar. I told her I had lost my twin sister to a fall on the same staircase 2 years earlier. When I said that, her eyes sharpened with a kind of quiet alarm. She asked if the railing had been repaired. I said yes, but my voice trembled. She asked if anyone had ever made me feel afraid in that house. The silence that followed was heavier than any confession. I finally whispered, "My father scares me." The social worker nodded slowly, not surprised. She said, "Fear is information, Claire. Pay attention to it." She explained the realities of the system. Unless I explicitly stated that I had been pushed or harmed, law enforcement could not make an arrest on suspicion alone. The hospital's report would trigger a review, but it was not enough to remove my father from the situation. I felt nausea twist through me. She continued, "Sometimes victims are not ready to name what happened. That does not mean we stop watching. It means we start documenting." I asked what happens if he comes here. She said he would not be allowed into the treatment area without permission, and the hospital security team had been notified. She offered to help me file for a temporary protection order. My breath shook. A protection order. The first barrier between my father and his control. The first step toward saying out loud what he had done. I nodded slowly. She squeezed my hand. She said, "Good. You deserve to feel safe." While she stepped out to gather paperwork, I stared at the curtain surrounding my bed, listening to the hum of the hospital, the beeping of nearby monitors, the murmur of nurses exchanging updates. Somewhere down the hall, a baby cried. Somewhere else, someone groaned in pain. The world kept moving, while mine felt like it was held together by threads. A resident doctor returned with imaging results and said, "You are lucky, Claire. No skull fracture, no brain bleed, but you do have a concussion. You need rest and someone to stay with you for the next 24 hours. My heart dropped. I had no one. Emily was gone. My father was the threat. Linda was the shadow that followed him. I whispered, "I do not have anyone." The doctor paused, then said, "We can arrange a short-term stay for observation." Relief washed over me until I realized staying meant my father could come looking for me, could demand answers, could twist the story before I could even speak. Fear rose again, but the social worker returned with the paperwork for the protective order and said, "Once this is filed, he cannot legally come near you." The world tilted. I nodded again. She sat beside me while I filled in the form with trembling fingers, each line a small act of reclaiming the truth he had stolen from me. When I handed it back, she said, "We will file this first thing in the morning. Rest now. You are not alone in this anymore." But as the curtain closed and the lights dimmed, I realized something that made my skin go cold. My father would know I survived. He would know police had come, and he would not accept that his story was finally slipping out of his control. I learned the next morning that systems meant to protect you can also terrify you because they move slowly, methodically, without the urgency that fear demands. I was sitting upright in the hospital bed, sipping lukewarm water, while the social worker prepared to file the protection order when a young officer arrived with a clipboard tucked under his arm. He looked nervous, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, and before he spoke, I already felt the drop in my stomach that warned me I did not want to hear what was coming. He said, "Claire, I wanted to update you on last night. We interviewed your father and Linda. They were cooperative." Cooperative. The word tasted like iron in the back of my throat. He continued, "The neighbor's call mentioned hearing you fall and hearing Linda shout. There is no probable cause to make an arrest at this time." My breath stilled. My mind spun. I managed to ask, "Is he out?" The officer nodded. He said yes. He was never detained. He is home. The room tilted slightly. My fingers tightened around the paper cup until it crumpled. The officer cleared his throat as if bracing himself for the next blow. He said also, "We are legally required to notify him that a temporary protection order has been filed." My breath hit the back of my throat like a hard punch. I whispered, "You told him already." He said, "Not yet, but it will be served within the hour." Panic surged through me so sharply it felt like my entire body recoiled. I imagined the moment he opened the door and found an officer standing there with a document that said, "Claire Whitmore fears for her life." I imagined the shift in his expression, not outrage, but calculation. I imagined the cold, precise fury of a man who believed he was losing control. The officer said, "I understand this is frightening, but the order prevents him from contacting you or coming within 500 feet of you." I almost laughed at the absurdity of hearing words like prevents and protects applied to someone like my father, because paper is not armor, and distance means nothing to a man who has shaped your fear since childhood. But I did not say that. I only nodded. After he left, the social worker sat on the edge of my bed with her hands folded gently in her lap. She said, "You have taken an important step. This is how the process begins." Begins. The word echoed with both relief and dread. The process begins. Because the process does not end quickly, and in that space between beginning and ending, you are forced to live with someone who sees consequences coming and prepares for them. My phone was on the bedside table, powered off since the night before. The nurse encouraged me to turn it on before discharge in case family had tried to contact me. Family. The word tightened my throat. I powered it on, and the screen lit up with a series of missed calls from unknown numbers. At first, I thought that they were automated hospital messages, but then a text arrived from a number that was not saved in my contacts. Only 3 words. Accidents can happen. My breath stopped. The letters blurred for a moment as I stared at the screen, unable to blink. There was no signature, no context, but the voice behind the message was unmistakable. My father had found a way around the protection order within minutes of learning it existed. My hands shook so badly I dropped the phone onto the blanket. The nurse hurried over, asking if I was all right, but I could not answer. The social worker picked up the phone and read the message. Her expression hardened. She said, "Claire, this is a violation." "When did this come in?" I whispered just now. She exhaled slowly as if steadying herself. "I will inform the officer who served the order. This will be added to the report." That should have comforted me, but it only deepened the terror blooming beneath my ribs. I knew what the message meant. He was warning me, not out of desperation, but out of confidence, because he understood the timing of the system and the gaps within it. A temporary protection order only gains power through enforcement, and enforcement only happens after evidence is gathered. He was telling me he was already several steps ahead. After discharge, the hospital arranged transportation to a safe temporary housing facility for patients with active domestic violence cases. A clean, modest place, quiet with security cameras, and staff who spoke softly and offered warm tea. But comfort cannot undo a lifetime of conditioning, and my heart pounded every time footsteps approached my door. I kept replaying the fall in my head, the moment before the railing dipped, the calm in his eyes, the absolute certainty in his voice. The more I replayed it, the clearer it became. He had not panicked when he saw me fall. He had not rushed down the stairs. He had not shouted in fear. He had reacted exactly the way someone reacts when watching an expected outcome. And now he knew I survived. The next day, a detective named Harris called to schedule a follow-up interview. His voice was older, steady, the kind that did not demand trust, but earned it slowly. He asked how I was feeling. I said I was alive, and the silence on his end suggested he understood the weight of those words. He said he wanted to revisit Emily's case. My breath hitched. He continued, "We have reason to believe the 2 incidents may be related, but I need your cooperation." I said yes. I said it too quickly. I wanted the truth to finally breathe. After the call, I checked my phone again, even though doing so made my stomach knot. Another message had arrived. This one was a photo. The Whitmore house at dusk, the porch light glowing, the staircase window illuminated like an eye watching me. No caption, no threat expressed, nothing explicit, but the implication was unmistakable. I wanted to throw up. I called the police immediately and reported the violation. The officer on duty said they would document it. Document it. Those 2 words felt like being submerged underwater, because documentation is not protection. Documentation is a record to be used later. Later is not helpful when danger has already memorized the shape of your fear. That night, I lay awake in the safe housing room, listening to the hum of the heater and the distant sound of traffic. Every so often, a car would slow outside and my breath would hitch until it passed. The social worker had told me I was safe, But safety is a feeling, not a fact, and my feelings had been trained for years to anticipate the worst. Early the next morning, Detective Harris contacted me again, saying he wanted to meet in person. I agreed. He drove to the facility and spoke with me in a small conference room with soft yellow walls. He asked about the railing, about past repairs, about tensions leading up to the fall. Then he asked something no one else had asked in 2 years. "Claire, did your sister ever tell you she felt unsafe?" Tears rose before words did. I nodded and whispered yes. She did, often. He wrote this down slowly. Then he asked, "Do you feel your father is capable of hurting you intentionally?" The question cracked open a part of me I had spent years burying. I took a long, shaking breath. Then I said yes. He is capable. His eyes softened, but his voice remained firm. "Thank you for telling me. We will be thorough, but it will take time." Time was the one thing I did not have. That evening, another message came, this time only one word. Soon. Not a direct threat, not explicit, but unmistakable. I reported it again. The officer repeated the same sentence. "Documentation has been added." The social worker urged me to stay inside the facility until the court hearing for the protection order extension, but every instinct screamed that walls and cameras would not stop a man who believed he owned the narrative. When I finally fell asleep just before dawn, I dreamed of the staircase again, only this time I was not falling. I was suspended in the air, frozen between steps, unable to move forward or back, watching my father adjust the railing with perfect calm. When I woke, I felt a cold certainty settle into my chest, like a truth I could no longer outrun. He was not finished, and the system that should have stopped him still had not caught up. Detective Harris began the investigation with the kind of quiet determination that made me believe for the first time in years that truth could actually survive my father. But even then, I understood that an investigation is not a rescue. It is a slow accumulation of facts that must compete with the stories people have already been trained to believe. He met with me again 2 days after our first conversation, this time in a private room at the safe housing facility, a place painted in calming blues and neutrals as if color alone could steady the nervous system. He spread out a notepad on the table and said, "We will proceed methodically. Claire, we will not rush this. Rushing creates mistakes, and mistakes are what defense attorneys live on." His voice was gentle, but carried the unmistakable resolve of someone who had spent decades separating lies from the people who benefit from them. He asked me to walk him through everything that happened the night I fell. I told him about Linda's call, about my father steering me toward the staircase, about his words, about the railing dipping beneath my hand. I told him about the familiar terror in my body, the dizziness, the slip, the impact. When I finished, he leaned back slightly and said, "Your account is consistent with intentional endangerment." My breath trembled. He wrote several notes, then continued, "I know you are scared, but your willingness to speak is the foundation of everything that follows." He paused. "Now, I need to ask you about Emily." For a moment, I could not breathe. Talking about Emily had always felt like walking barefoot across broken glass. But he waited patiently, not pushing, not filling the silence. When I finally nodded, he asked for every detail I remembered from the night she died. I recounted the argument, her fear, my father's calmness, the way the railing dipped beneath her hand, the sound of her body striking the landing. It felt like reopening a wound that had never healed because it had never been allowed to heal. Harris listened without interrupting, but I saw something shift in his eyes, something like recognition layered over disbelief. He asked, "Has the railing been repaired since then?" I told him yes more than once and that my father always claimed it was routine maintenance. Harris wrote this down, then said, "I will need to inspect the house." I inhaled sharply. "Is that allowed?" He nodded. "Not without a warrant, but we can begin with a request for voluntary inspection. Your father is unlikely to refuse because refusing would make him look uncooperative, and he is a man who understands optics." The truth of that statement felt like a bruise forming beneath my skin. 2 days later, Harris called to tell me he had visited the house. I felt my chest tighten as he described it. He said your father was polite but guarded. Linda barely spoke. The railing looks recently altered. Altered. The word flashed through me like electricity. He continued, I touched the underside near the midpoint. Several screws were loose. The wood also shows signs of sanding and recent resealing. My pulse hammered. He said Claire railings should not be modified this frequently, nor in this manner. It is suspicious. But suspicion is not evidence. I felt my breath falter again. I asked if he had taken photographs. Yes, he said, but a carpenter's analysis will hold more weight. I am arranging for a forensic carpenter to evaluate structural integrity and determine whether tampering occurred deliberately. Deliberately. Hearing the word spoken aloud made the room shrink around me. I kept replaying Emily's fall in my mind, the way her hand had slipped the tilt of her body, the quiet gasp in her throat. Harris continued, I will also be pulling the old police report and the medical examiner's findings from your sister's case. I need to see what was missed or overlooked. The idea that someone might finally re-examine Emily's death made my eyes burn. For 2 years, her memory had been trapped beneath an official narrative that did not belong to her. Harris paused. I also requested the recording of the original 911 call from that night. My blood turned to ice. I whispered the call cut out. He nodded. It did, but calls rarely cut out without capturing at least a few seconds of audio. If anything was recorded, we will have it. Hope rose inside me like a fragile bloom, but fear followed immediately behind it. What if the recording was gone? What if it never existed? What if the truth had been erased just like everything else? Harris must have sensed my anxiety because he said, whatever is there, we will find it. The next day, he met with the neighbor who had called 911 after hearing me fall. Her name was Marcy, a retired school teacher with a sharp voice and a sharper memory. She told him Claire did not fall naturally. The sound was wrong. Too sudden. Too heavy. It did not sound like someone missing a step. It sounded like someone losing control before they hit the stairs. She also told him about seeing my father pacing on the porch afterward, calm phone in hand, not panicked, not distraught. Harris wrote everything down. When he relayed her statements to me, he said witnesses like Marcy matter because patterns matter, control matters, behavior matters, and your father's behavior does not match a man witnessing an accident. The forensic carpenter arrived at my family's house the following week, accompanied by Harris. I was not present, but Harris later described the visit in such detail that I could picture it vividly. The carpenter, a middle-aged man with decades of structural experience, examined the railing with slow, meticulous movements. He unscrewed a section near the middle, revealing stripped threads and misaligned supports. He said, "This is not normal wear. This looks intentional. Someone loosened these screws and then tightened them intermittently to disguise the damage." My breath caught when Harris told me that. Intentional. He continued, "The carpenter believes the structural instability would be triggered when weight shifts on a specific section, just enough to cause imbalance, but not enough to break the railing entirely." I whispered like a trap. Harris nodded. Exactly. He also said the modifications appear recent within the last few months. Months. My mind reeled. This meant the danger was not only from the past, not only an echo of what had happened to Emily, it meant someone had prepared for a second fall. My fall. Harris said we now have probable cause to believe the railing was tampered with deliberately. But I need more. I need motive timeline behavioral patterns, witness statements. Your testimony helps, but corroboration strengthens everything. He interviewed Linda next, and when he told me about that conversation, I felt both pity and anger twist inside me. He said Linda was nervous. She contradicted herself several times. She said she was in the kitchen when you fell. Then she said she was upstairs. Then she said she heard the fall but did not see it. She eventually said your father told her what to say. I felt the room tilt. He asked, "Did she tell you what he told her to say?" Harris nodded. "Yes." She said he told her Claire tripped. Say that. Say only that. My throat tightened. Linda had always chosen loyalty through fear. She had always chosen him over truth, over Emily, over me. But now her cracks were showing. Harris continued. She also admitted the railing had been repaired multiple times at your father's insistence. She said she never questioned it. I whispered because questioning him was not allowed. Harris studied me for a moment, then said, "Claire, did he ever threaten you directly?" The word threaten felt too small for everything he had done, but I forced myself to nod. Yes. The text messages, the calls, the warning hidden inside every calm sentence he spoke. Harris collected screenshots of the messages I had received. He printed them, labeled them, added timestamps, and placed them in a file with my name on it. Seeing that file made my hands shake. It felt like the first real acknowledgement that my fear was not imaginary, that someone else finally saw the monster I had been raised to obey. 2 days later, Harris said something that made my breath falter. "We received the 911 recording from your sister's case." The room went silent around me. I felt a coldness climb my spine. I whispered, "What is on it?" He hesitated, but only for a moment. Then he said, "You should hear it. Not alone. With me." We sat in a small office at the precinct, a room filled with old filing cabinets and fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly. He pressed play. The recording crackled to life with static, then a faint, shaky breath. Emily's voice. My heart lurched painfully inside my chest. She said I fell. Then another breath ragged. Then she said my dad pushed me. The words were thin as thread, but unmistakable. The call cut off immediately after. I covered my mouth as the sound of my sister's fear echoed through the room. I could not cry. I could barely breathe. Harris let the silence stretch. Then he said, "This changes everything." My entire body trembled. He continued, "We now have a recorded statement from your sister minutes before she died. It shows a pattern of danger, a pattern of intent. Combined with the forensic analysis of the railing, the text messages, the witness accounts, and your testimony, we have a compelling case for attempted murder and for reopening your sister's case as a potential homicide." The word homicide felt surreal, as if saying it aloud broke some invisible barrier protecting my father for years. I asked what happens now. Harris said now we build the case. Carefully, relentlessly. And when we have enough, we move. But be prepared, Claire. Your father may sense the walls closing in. He may escalate. Fear shot through me like electric current. I asked, "Am I safe?" He did not answer immediately. Then he said, "You are safer than you have ever been, but you are not out of danger yet." Those words echoed in my mind for the rest of the day. For the first time, I understood that this was no longer just an investigation. It was a countdown, and my father, who had always stayed several steps ahead of everyone, was about to learn that the truth he thought he had buried was clawing its way back into the light. The evidence did not arrive all at once. It came in pieces scattered like fragments of memory, finally rising from the bottom of a dark lake, each one sharp enough to cut. Detective Harris called me early in the morning, 3 days after we listened to Emily's recording. His voice carried a tone I had not heard before, something between urgency and triumph. He said, "Claire, we received the full forensic report from the carpenter." I sat up in the narrow bed at the safe housing facility, gripping the phone as if the truth needed physical anchoring. He continued, "The railing at your home was manipulated deliberately in a way that created predictable instability. The carpenter found tool markings consistent with repeated adjustments and identified a pattern of loosening and tightening screws over time." My breath caught, but he was not finished. He said the alterations were done to create variability so that any fall would appear accidental. I felt the air leave my lungs in a slow, collapsing exhale. Hearing the truth spoken in a professional tone made it terrifyingly real. For years, I had doubted myself, wondering if memory was a trick or if trauma had painted my father darker than he truly was. But now there was evidence, cold, measurable evidence. "Harris said I will need you to come to the precinct this afternoon. We have additional material you need to hear." I spent the next hours pacing the small room, unable to sit still. The thought of hearing more evidence made my stomach twist, but I also felt something else rising beneath the fear. A sense of righteous gravity, as if all the silent years were finally waking. When I arrived at the precinct, Harris led me into the same small office where we had listened to Emily's last words. The blinds were half closed, casting striped shadows across the table. On it sat a stack of printed pages, a file with my name, and a small speaker. "He said what you hear today may be difficult, but it is vital." He pressed play. A recording crackled to life. At first, I heard only footsteps on hardwood and the distant hum of a refrigerator. Then, Linda's voice came through trembling as if she were talking while trying not to cry. She said, "I told you this would happen, Richard. I told you she would talk." My entire body went rigid. The sound of their private conversation pulled me across time into the familiar, suffocating atmosphere of that house. My father's voice responded calmly. He said she will not talk. She knows her place. Harris paused the recording and looked at me. He said this was captured from a device placed in a neighboring property during routine noise complaints. It was unrelated to your case, but admissible because the neighbor filed the recording voluntarily. My mind spun. He pressed play again. Linda said, trembling, "What about the railing? What if they check it? What if they say it was like before?" My father's voice deepened slightly. He said, "Do not worry. I fixed it. I fixed it the same way I fixed it for Emily." For several seconds I could not breathe. The room felt both too hot and too small. Hearing him say it so plainly, without remorse, without fear, without hesitation, shattered every lingering attempt my mind had made to excuse him or humanize him. He continued on the recording. The inspector never looked closely last time. They saw a broken railing and a girl who was clumsy. "They will see the same thing now," Linda whispered, but Claire survived. "What if she remembers? My father said she will doubt herself. She always does. She always has." I closed my eyes tightly as tears rose. My entire childhood suddenly rearranged itself in my memory, not as a series of misunderstandings, but as a carefully crafted system of control. Everything he had done had been intentional. Everything had been designed to corrode belief in my own perception. Harris turned off the recording and let silence settle. Then he said, "This is what we call a spontaneous admission. It is powerful. But there is more." My hands trembled as he opened the file and pulled out several sheets of paper. He handed one to me. It was a copy of a bank statement from 2 years ago. He said this shows withdrawals made by your father in the days following Emily's death. Several large amounts. Cash. The timing aligns with payments made to a private contractor who was never listed on the official home repair invoice. The carpenter examined these transactions and confirmed that the contractor specialized in emergency structural modification. I stared at the page as a cold realization spread through me. He had not only killed my sister, he had paid to erase the evidence. Harris placed another sheet in front of me. This one was a transcription from an interview with Marcy the neighbor. He summarized her testimony. She said your father prevented her from coming inside to help after Emily fell. She said he blocked the stairway and insisted the paramedics handle everything. She said he looked irritated rather than shocked. Hearing this confirmed what I had sensed but never voiced. My father's concern had always been the scene, not the victim. Harris then showed me a third document, the reopened file from the medical examiner. He said the examiner reviewed the injuries from your sister's autopsy and concluded that while consistent with a fall, they were also consistent with a forward push, especially given the angle. I felt my pulse race. The idea that the truth had always been sitting quietly inside those reports, but had never been investigated properly, made fury rise in me like a storm. But Harris was not done. He opened another folder and revealed photographs printed in glossy black and white. He said these were taken yesterday. The images showed the underside of the railing, the stripped screws, the mismatched wood grain, the faint but visible indentations from repeated tool use. Each photo felt like a blow and a validation at the same time. He said, "This is intentional sabotage. It is consistent with creating the appearance of a weakened structure. It was not maintenance. It was preparation." My hands shook as I traced the grain of the wood in one of the images. I whispered he planned it. Harris nodded gravely. "Yes, and not just once." I felt something inside me crack open, not pain, but a fierce clarity that spread like fire. For years, I had believed I was the fragile one, the weak one, the unstable one. But I was not the one slipping into madness. He was the architect of every fall. Harris leaned back. He said, "We now have enough evidence to seek charges for attempted murder against you and to reopen your sister's case as a likely homicide. We also have grounds for obstruction of justice witness manipulation and falsification of reports. I swallowed hard. Then he added one more sentence quietly but firmly. And we have your father on tape admitting he altered the railing for both incidents. I stared at the table, trying to absorb the enormity of it. Years of silence replaced by a flood of truth so overwhelming it felt unreal. After a long breath, Harris said, "There is one more thing." He reached for a small manila envelope and slid it across the table. Inside was a printed text log from the number that had sent me the messages. "Accidents can happen, and soon." Harris pointed to the timestamps. He said these messages were sent immediately after your father learned about the protection order. They demonstrate consciousness of guilt and escalation. My shoulders tightened as the fear that had been sitting in my chest for days pulsed sharply. Harris noticed. He said, "Claire, I know this is a lot, but you are no longer alone in this. We are not speculating. We are proving everything." His words settled over me like a weighted blanket, grounding and terrifying all at once. Then he said something that shifted the entire balance of the investigation. We located a voicemail from Emily that was never opened. I felt cold all over. He explained it was sent minutes before her fall, but remained in your father's phone records, though deleted from the device. The carrier retained it. He pressed play. Emily's voice filled the room again, soft, nervous trembling. She said, "If anything happens to me, it was not an accident." Her breathing hitched. Then she whispered, "Claire, I love you." The message ended. My vision blurred instantly. I covered my mouth and leaned forward as grief surged like a wave, crashing through every part of me. Emily had tried to warn someone. She had tried to leave a trail. And no one listened. Until now. Harris let the silence hold for several long moments before saying, "This voicemail will be devastating in court. It shows fear, intention, and knowledge of danger. It shows she knew someone wanted to harm her. It shows she trusted you." His last sentence hit me the hardest. She trusted you. I had carried guilt for so long, wondering if I failed her, but hearing her voice again making a plan to protect herself, it reframed everything. The guilt softened into something else, something closer to purpose. Harris closed the file. He said, "Claire, what happens next will not be easy, but the truth is finally on record. It will not disappear again." The room felt different after that, as if the air itself understood what had shifted. My father's story was no longer the only story. There were facts now. There were voices that could not be silenced. There were marks on wood that could not be smoothed away. There were timestamps and recordings and expert findings. There was Emily, not gone, not forgotten, speaking. And now it was my turn to speak too. The confrontation did not come with dramatic music or flashing sirens. It came quietly on a Thursday morning when the sky over Cincinnati hung low and gray as if the city itself were holding its breath. Detective Harris told me the night before that they were ready to move and that I should not be anywhere near the house when it happened. But staying away felt impossible, like asking a wound not to feel pain. So I waited at the precinct in a small interview room with my hands clasped tightly in my lap while Harris and two other detectives drove to the house I once called home. The minutes crawled like hours. Every time a door opened or footsteps approached, I felt my pulse spike, imagining 100 different outcomes, most of them shaped by fear rather than hope. When Harris finally returned, his expression revealed nothing. He closed the door behind him, sat across from me, and said, "Claire, I need to prepare you." My chest tightened painfully. He continued, "Your father did not react the way we expected." My hands trembled, but I forced myself to ask, how did he react? Harris exhaled slowly, calm, almost relieved. The word chilled me. Relieved. Harris said they served the warrant, informed him of the reopened investigation, and before they even asked a question, he said I knew this day would come. That sentence hit me harder than I anticipated. It was not fear or regret. It was acceptance, as though he believed he had simply outrun justice for as long as he could and the expiration date had arrived. Harris continued Linda was there as well. She was shaking. She asked repeatedly if she could leave. We separated them immediately. I imagined Linda standing in the foyer, the same place where she once hugged visitors and told them what a wonderful father Richard was now trembling beneath the weight of the truth she helped bury. Then Harris said, "Your father asked to speak with you." My stomach dropped. The room seemed to shrink around me. I whispered, "Why?" Harris studied me with a steady gaze. He said he claims there are things only you will understand, but I do not recommend speaking with him alone. I nodded quickly. I did not want to be anywhere near him alone ever again. Still, something in me wanted answers, not closure necessarily, but clarity, some final glimpse of the man I had feared for my entire life. Harris arranged the meeting in a controlled room with 2 detectives present and the door unlocked. When my father entered, he was handcuffed, but stood tall, composed, almost dignified in a chilling way. He looked older than I remembered, lines etched deeper into his face, but his eyes were the same cold blue that had monitored my entire childhood. He sat across from me, and for several moments we said nothing. I waited for anger, defensiveness, denial. Instead, he spoke softly as though we were discussing an ordinary misunderstanding. "Claire," he said, "I always knew you would be the difficult one." The difficult one. The familiar sting shot through me, a reflex born from years of those exact words. But something different happened this time. Instead of shrinking, I felt steadier, anchored by everything Harris had shown me. I replied, "I know what you did." He tilted his head slightly. His voice remained calm. "You know what you think you know, but you have always been emotional. Easily influenced, easily frightened. For a moment, the old doubt rose inside me like a ghost. Then I remembered Emily's voice saying my dad pushed me. I remembered the carpenter's report, the photographs, the recordings. I met his gaze and said no. "I know the truth." His jaw tightened, just barely. A crack in the mask he had spent decades polishing. He leaned back and said, "Do you really believe you were ever in danger from me?" I answered yes. I always was. His eyes sharpened the way they used to when he was deciding whether I needed discipline or silence. Then he said something that made the detectives shift in their chairs. He said, "I never wanted to hurt you, but control is necessary. Control keeps a household stable. Control prevents chaos. Without control, you and Emily would have fallen apart long ago." I whispered, "Emily did fall." His expression did not change. He said Emily was weak. She never listened. She tried to leave before she was ready. I felt a wave of nausea twist through me. Harris leaned forward but did not interrupt. My father continued, "And you? Claire, you were supposed to learn from her mistakes." A tremor ran through my hands. I asked, "Did you loosen the railing?" The silence that followed was both short and heavy. Then he spoke with a calm that felt like a blade. "The house must obey its owner. The house must reflect order. Sometimes the structure needs adjustment." It took me a moment to understand what he meant, and then my stomach turned as the meaning sank in. He would not say yes. He would not say no. He spoke in riddles that revealed everything while admitting nothing. Harris ended the conversation after that. My father was escorted out. No fight, no panic, only a strange resignation that made everything feel even more unsettling. After my father was removed from the room, Harris asked if I wanted to hear what Linda said in her interview. I nodded. He explained that once separated from my father, she broke quickly. She cried through most of the interview and repeated I did not know what he was capable of. It sounded hollow, even pitiful, but Harris said she had given information that strengthened the case. She admitted the railing repairs were always done without explanation. She admitted my father controlled every aspect of the household, including who was allowed to speak and when. She admitted she never questioned his decisions because he convinced her that doubt was betrayal. I listened without sympathy. Linda had chosen silence. Linda had chosen him over us every time. The arrest happened an hour later. My father was officially charged with attempted murder in my case, homicide reopening in Emily's case, and obstruction of justice. I watched through a window as 2 officers escorted him toward the holding area. He did not look back. Not once. The booking process was clinical and unceremonious. Fingerprints, photographs, personal belongings cataloged. There was no grand outburst, no final display of dominance. Only a man who believed himself above consequence finally stepping into it. I expected to feel triumphant or vindicated or even relieved. Instead, I felt hollow, as if years of fear had left an imprint inside me that could not be filled with justice alone. Harris approached me after the arrest and said the prosecutor will move quickly on this. The evidence is strong. Your testimony is strong. The pattern is unmistakable. He paused, then added, "You did everything right, Claire." I wanted to believe him, but as I stood there watching the elevator doors close on the man who shaped my childhood, I felt a mix of grief, rage, and something strange and unfamiliar. Freedom. A freedom so new it felt frightening. Later that evening at the safe housing facility, I received word that Linda had also been taken into custody for providing false statements and assisting in covering up evidence after Emily's death. Hearing that she too would face consequences brought a small measure of symmetry to the chaos. For the first time in years, I felt Emily near me, not as a memory trapped in fear, but as a presence light and steady. Justice had begun. Not completed, but begun. And I knew the next step would be the courtroom, where truth would no longer whisper from recordings and broken wood, but speak openly under the weight of law. As I lay in bed that night, my body still buzzing from the events of the day, I whispered into the dark, "Emily, we are finally being heard." And for the first time since she died, the darkness around me did not feel suffocating. It felt open like a door finally unlatched. The courthouse in Hamilton County felt colder than any building I had ever entered, not because of the temperature, but because of the weight of what waited inside. The morning of the hearing, I walked through the glass doors with Detective Harris beside me, my palms damp, my breath thin, my heart drumming a pulse I could feel in my throat. Everything about the place smelled of old paper-varnished wood and the kind of quiet that carries 1,000 stories of people trying to survive what someone else did to them. This was my turn. This was Emily's turn. And yet my legs trembled as though the ground itself questioned whether I deserved to be here. Harris walked me to the witness room, a narrow space with a table, 2 chairs, and a window overlooking the courthouse lawn. He said the prosecution will call you this afternoon. The judge already reviewed the evidence and approved full presentation. It will be intense. Be ready. I nodded, even though readiness felt like an impossible state. For hours, I sat in that small room listening to the faint hum of voices through the wall while attorneys walked past carrying boxes of exhibits. At noon, the prosecutor, a woman named Margaret Dawson with silver streaks in her hair and a calm, analytical rhythm to her voice, came in to speak with me. She said, "Claire, we have everything we need, but I will not ask you to testify if you feel unsafe. You have been through enormous trauma. This is your choice." Her eyes held no pressure, no judgment, only respect. I took a slow breath and said, "I want to speak. Emily deserves to be heard." Her nod was small but full of meaning. She placed her hand gently over mine and said, "Then we will give her voice back today." When court reconvened, I walked into the courtroom behind her. The room was full, not with strangers like the sensationalized trials you see on television, but with people whose lives would be deeply affected by the truth revealed here. Reporters sat in the back row. Several domestic violence advocates sat near the aisle. A few neighbors, including Marcy, sat near the front, their expressions somber. Then, on the right side of the room, behind the defense table, sat my father. His hands were cuffed but rested neatly in his lap. His posture was perfectly straight, his eyes cold as winter sky lifted to me the moment I entered. For a heartbeat, my body reacted as it always had. Fear shot through me like lightning. My spine stiffened. My breath caught. It was as if he still controlled the air around me. But something had changed. I was not the child at the staircase anymore. I was not the young woman apologizing for doubting myself. I was the surviving twin. I was the living witness, and I had truth on my side. He saw that resolve in me. His expression tightened. Then he looked away. The judge, a stern woman with an even voice and a presence that commanded stillness, entered the room. Everyone rose. Then testimony began. The prosecution started with the forensic carpenter. He was concise and confident as he explained the abnormalities in the railing. He pointed to photographs projected onto a screen. He walked the jury through stripped screws, mismatched grain tool marks that indicated repeated manipulation. He said there is no scenario in which this could be accidental wear. Someone tampered with it deliberately. Defense counsel attempted to undermine him by suggesting alternative explanations: worn materials, house settling, humidity changes, natural deterioration. But the carpenter remained steady. He said no natural deterioration results in alternating stability. That requires human adjustment. It was, in essence, a trap. Hearing him say the word trap made the room still. I could feel the jury absorb it. Next, the prosecution called the investigator who had reviewed Emily's autopsy. He testified that while the injuries could be consistent with a fall, they were equally consistent with being pushed forward with enough force to cause imbalance. When he described the angle of impact and the lack of defensive injuries, tears formed at the corners of my eyes. Emily had not tripped. She had not lost her balance. She had not fallen accidentally. She had been silenced, and the world had believed him instead of her. Then they played the 911 recording, the courtroom filled with the static of the old tape. Then her breathing soft, frightened, so much younger than I remembered. When she whispered, "My dad pushed me," the sound sliced through the room. People shifted in their seats. Someone in the audience gasped softly. My father stared straight ahead, face blank, without shame. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to demand a single tear or tremor or acknowledgement that his daughter had spoken her truth before dying. But he sat still, as though the words passing through the speakers were part of a story told by a stranger. Then came the recording from the neighboring house, the one where he said he fixed it the same way he fixed it for Emily. When those words echoed through the courtroom, the prosecutor paused the audio and let silence sit like a weight on every chest in the room. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, as though absorbing the gravity of what she had heard. Defense counsel attempted to argue the recording was taken out of context, but the attempt fell flat because context did not soften confession. It sharpened it. Linda was called next. She walked to the witness stand with clenched hands and trembling shoulders. She did not look at me. She did not look at my father. Her voice shook through most of her testimony. She admitted she had lied. She admitted she had repeated whatever my father told her to say. She admitted she had seen him tighten the railing weeks before my fall. When defense counsel asked if she had been coerced, she said no. When asked why she had not spoken earlier, she said because he told me if I said anything, I would regret it for the rest of my life. Her voice cracked and she cried openly. I did not feel sorry for her. Not yet. Her tears were years too late. After several more witnesses, including Marcy and the responding paramedics, the judge called for a brief recess. I sat in the waiting room with my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Harris sat beside me. He said, "You are doing extraordinarily well." I whispered, "I am terrified." He said, "That is how we know you are telling the truth." When recess ended, the prosecutor approached me and said, "Claire, it is time." Her tone was gentle, but the words struck through me like a bell. I stood on shaking legs and followed her into the courtroom. Every eye turned to me. I sat in the witness chair. The wood felt cold beneath my palms. I took the oath, my voice barely audible. The prosecutor began slowly guiding me through my childhood, my relationship with Emily, the control my father exerted. She asked about the railing, his words, the fall, the fear that had shaped our home. I answered honestly. My voice wavered sometimes, but I did not break. I had broken enough in my life. When she reached the question about Emily's last voicemail, my throat tightened. She asked, "Did you hear your sister's voice saying she feared for her life?" I whispered yes. "And what did that mean to you?" I said it meant she knew. She knew he would hurt her. She tried to warn someone. She trusted someone to hear her. The prosecutor nodded gently. Then she said, "Did your father ever show remorse?" I answered no, not once. Her final question was, "Why are you here today?" I looked at the jury and felt years of silence pushing up inside me, finally demanding space. I said, "Because my sister's voice deserves to be heard, and because he cannot be allowed to do this again." When the prosecutor finished, the defense attorney approached. His tone was cool, measured, rehearsed. He asked if I had ever been diagnosed with anxiety. I said yes. He asked if my fear could have distorted my memory. I said no. He asked if I hated my father. I said I feared him more than I hated him. He asked if I had ever considered that maybe Emily had simply slipped. I said I heard her say my dad pushed me. He paused, then said, "People under stress say confusing things." I replied, Emily was not confused. The attorney hesitated. He looked unsettled by my steadiness. He asked nothing further. When I stepped down from the witness stand, my legs shook, but my spine remained straight. I returned to my seat knowing I had given everything I had. The prosecutor presented final evidence, bank statements, carpenter findings, photographs, audio logs, texts showing conscious intent. Each piece built a wall around the truth high enough that denial could not climb it. Finally, the prosecutor delivered her closing argument. She spoke with quiet force, a current of conviction running beneath every word. She told the jury this is not about a clumsy railing or an unfortunate fall. This is about a pattern. This is about control. This is about a man who believed he could rewrite the story because he controlled the staircase and the silence inside his home. But he does not control this room. You do. My father stared at her with an expression that bordered on contempt, but for the first time there was something else in his eyes. Uncertainty. A crack in the armor. When court adjourned for the day, I stepped outside into the cool afternoon air. The sky had lightened. I felt a strange weight lift from my chest. Not relief, but the first breath after being underwater for too long. Harris walked beside me and said, "Tomorrow the jury deliberates." I asked, "Does it take long?" He said, "Sometimes. Sometimes not. Your case is strong." Very strong. That night I barely slept. I lay awake thinking of Emily, imagining her beside me, the way she used to breathe softly when she slept, the way her hair curled against her cheek. I whispered to her that I was trying, that I hoped she could see what I was doing, that I hoped she felt seen after being silenced for so long. Morning arrived slowly, gray, and quiet. I returned to the courthouse with hands that trembled despite my efforts to control them. When the judge entered and the bailiff announced that the jury had reached a verdict, the entire room shifted. Energy tightened, breath held. My father sat motionless, his face carved into stone. The jurors filed in their expressions solemn. I did not know what they would say or how they would say it, but I knew we had finally reached the threshold of truth. The judge asked everyone to rise as the jury entered, and I stood with my palms pressed against my thighs, trying to steady the trembling that had taken hold of me since dawn. The jurors did not look at anyone, not at the prosecutor, not at the defense, not even at my father, who remained perfectly still in his seat as though he had prepared for this moment his entire life. The foreperson held a folded sheet of paper, her fingers tight around the edges, and when the judge asked if the jury had reached a decision, she nodded once. My breath caught. I felt the weight of every year of silence pressing down on me, and yet in that same second, I felt Emily beside me, a presence rather than a memory steadying my spine. The foreperson cleared her throat and read the verdict in a calm, precise tone that seemed almost detached, although the words altered the course of my life. On the charge of attempted murder of Claire Whitmore, we find the defendant guilty. A sound escaped me halfway between a sob and a breath, quiet enough that only Harris heard it. My father did not flinch. His eyes remained forward, unblinking. The foreperson continued. On the charge of homicide in the reopened case of Emily Whitmore, we find the defendant guilty. My knees weakened, but I stayed upright, gripping the railing as if it were the only thing preventing me from collapsing. For a brief moment, I saw Emily at the top of the staircase on that night 2 years ago. I saw her reaching for balance that never came. And now, finally, someone acknowledged what she had tried to say with her last breath. The foreperson read the remaining charges. Obstruction of justice, guilty witness manipulation, guilty, falsification of statements, guilty. When she finished, she folded the paper again and sat down. A hush spread across the room like a slow-moving tide. The judge let the silence settle before she spoke. Her voice was firm, but carried a compassion that did not undermine her authority. She said the pattern of violence, manipulation, and deception presented in this courtroom shows a profound abuse of power within a family structure. The defendant exploited trust, exploited vulnerability, and created an environment of fear masked by outward respectability. This court does not take such acts lightly." She looked at my father and said, "Please, rise for sentencing." He stood slowly, still composed, still dignified in a way that made the cruelty of his actions feel even more chilling. The judge continued on the charge of attempted murder. "The court sentences you to 30 years in state prison. On the charge of homicide in the death of Emily Whitmore, the court sentences you to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 35 years. On the charge of obstruction of justice, 5 years. On the charges of witness manipulation and falsification of statements, an additional 5 years combined. These sentences will run consecutively." Consecutively. The words struck me like a bell. He would not be walking free. Not again. Not ever in any meaningful sense. My father nodded once, as though this were an inconvenient business matter rather than judgment for destroying the lives of his daughters. The judge did not allow him to speak. She said, "This is not a moment for justification or defense. It is a moment for truth to stand. Sit down." He lowered himself slowly back into the chair, his hands still cuffed, his posture still straight. But something in his eyes had changed. The certainty was gone. The arrogance was gone. There was a fracture there, a realization that his control over the narrative had ended. Harris glanced at me and whispered, "You did it." But the truth was, I did not feel victorious. Not yet. The bailiff moved to escort my father out of the courtroom. As he passed by my row, I felt my breath freeze. For a heartbeat, his eyes flicked toward me, not with rage, not with pity, but with something I could not name. Then he was taken through the side door and disappeared from view. The courtroom exhaled. Reporters scribbled notes. Domestic violence advocates exchanged glances heavy with relief and recognition. Margaret Dawson approached me and placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. She said, "This is Justice Clare. Justice for you and Emily." I nodded, but the movement felt slow, distant, as though my body had not yet accepted the reality that the man who terrorized my life was no longer free to do so. Linda was sentenced next. She trembled so badly the bailiff had to steady her. The prosecutor had charged her with accessory after the fact, false reporting, and obstruction. The judge sentenced her to 8 years with the possibility of early release for cooperation. When she turned to leave, she looked at me for the first time since the trial began. Her face was streaked with tears. Her mouth moved into a shape that looked like "I am sorry," but no sound came out. I felt nothing. Not forgiveness, not anger, just a quiet distance, as though she were a stranger whose choices had carved permanent scars into my life. When court adjourned, I stepped outside into the crisp afternoon air, feeling it fill my lungs in a way that felt both unfamiliar and necessary. People filed past me as they left the courthouse, some offering small nods of support, others whispering words I could not hear but understood by the look in their eyes. Harris stood beside me. He said, "You survived something unimaginable. And you faced him. You spoke. That matters more than you know." I looked up at the courthouse columns towering above us, their stone surfaces weathered but unmoved. I thought of Emily then, not falling, not afraid, but smiling the way she used to when she beat me in a race across the backyard. I whispered, "We did it, Emily. We finally did it." A breeze passed over me as if in answer. For the first time since childhood, I felt the fear ease out of my body like smoke dissipating in open air. Not gone completely. Trauma does not disappear on command, but loosened, uncoiled, no longer dictating every breath. As I walked down the courthouse steps, Harris said, "What will you do now?" The question lingered. What would I do without the constant anticipation of danger? What would I do with a life that finally belonged to me? I said, "I am not sure yet, but I know I am free. I know she is free. I know the house cannot hurt us anymore." He nodded. It was enough. The sun broke through the clouds, then pale but warm, casting light across the courthouse lawn. I stood there letting it touch my face, letting it remind me of something simple and profound. Surviving is not the same as living, and now, for the first time, I could choose the difference. In the weeks after the sentencing, the world felt strangely quiet, as if my life had been a storm for so long that calmness seemed unnatural. I woke up each morning expecting the familiar jolt of fear, the instinctive scanning of my surroundings, the bracing for the next blow that never came. Instead, there was stillness soft and tentative like a room that had just been exorcised of a lingering presence. Healing did not arrive as a single sweeping miracle. It came in moments small enough that at first I did not even recognize them. The first morning I made coffee without glancing over my shoulder. The first time I slept through the night without waking to the echo of Emily's fall. The first day I walked outside without imagining footsteps behind me. I moved into a small apartment on the opposite side of Cincinnati, a modest place with pale blue walls and a balcony that looked over a courtyard filled with oak trees. I chose it because it had no staircase. I chose it because the hallway lights were bright and the doors sturdy, and because for the first time in my life, I could choose safety rather than endure the illusion of it. I spent my evenings unpacking boxes at a slow pace, setting my own rhythm instead of matching the rhythm of fear. I kept Emily's journal on my nightstand, the turquoise one she used during our senior year. I read her entries carefully, letting her voice fill the space between my breaths. Sometimes I cried. Sometimes I smiled. Sometimes I closed the journal and pressed my palm against the cover as if I could feel her pulse beneath it. One Saturday morning I visited her grave for the first time since the trial. The cemetery was quiet except for the rustling of leaves and the distant hum of cars passing on the main road. I brought a bouquet of white lilies because she used to say they looked like stars when they opened. I knelt in front of her headstone, tracing her name with my fingertips. I told her everything, how the jury believed her, how the judge spoke truth over her memory, how her voice had shaped the case, how she had saved me even in her absence. I whispered we won Emily, and the wind moved gently around me as if answering. I did not leave until the sun dipped low and the grass grew cool beneath my knees. After that day, I felt something in me shift. It was not closure because grief does not operate in neat endings, but it was release, a loosening of the invisible cords that had kept me tied to a past that never allowed me to breathe freely. I started therapy twice a week. My therapist, a calm woman with thoughtful eyes, helped me untangle years of conditioning and taught me how to name what I had endured. She explained that surviving control means learning autonomy again, step by step, choosing small freedoms that eventually stitch a life together. She told me healing is not linear. Some days I felt strong enough to imagine a future. Other days I could not get out of bed. Both were part of the process. Slowly, I rebuilt pieces of myself I did not know I had lost. I went back to work part-time in medical billing, easing into routines that felt predictable and safe. My coworkers were gentle with me, offering support without pity. I learned how to breathe again in busy rooms. I learned that my voice did not have to be quiet to be accepted. One afternoon, Marcy, the neighbor who had called 911 after my fall, stopped by my apartment with a basket of muffins and a handwritten note that said, "You mattered then and you matter now." Her kindness broke something in me in the best possible way. It reminded me that the world had good people in it, people who chose to see what others ignored. As winter faded into spring, I created new rituals: walks in the park, journaling, cooking dinners for myself instead of eating whatever was convenient. I planted a small herb garden on my balcony. Emily would have laughed at my attempts to keep plants alive, but somewhere I imagined her cheering anyway. The nightmares still came but less often. The panic still rose, sometimes unexpected and sharp, but it no longer controlled me. It was a reminder of what I had lived through, not what I still lived under. Freedom is not the absence of fear. It is the presence of choice. And I finally had choices. One quiet evening in late April, I stood on my balcony watching the sunset paint the courtyard in warm amber light. Children were playing downstairs, their laughter rising like sparks in the wind. For the first time in years, I felt peace settle gently over me. Not the fragile temporary peace my father used to enforce, but real peace. Peace that belonged to me. Peace that Emily would have wanted for me. I whispered thank you to the sky, unsure whether I was speaking to her, to God, to the universe, or to the version of myself who had survived but grateful all the same. As the months passed, people began to ask what I planned to do next. My therapist asked. Harris asked. Even Margaret Dawson asked. I did not know at first. Then one afternoon, while sorting through Emily's journal, I found a page she had written 3 months before she died. It said, "I want to help girls who feel trapped the way we used to. Even if I can help just one, it will be worth it." Reading those words felt like a calling. That night, I researched organizations that support survivors of domestic violence. I read about volunteers who speak at hospitals and community centers, survivors who share their stories to help others recognize warning signs. The idea terrified me, but it also felt right. A year after the trial, I delivered my first talk at a women's shelter in northern Kentucky. I stood at a podium with trembling hands and spoke about the quiet forms of control, the subtle manipulation, the way fear becomes normal when you grow up inside it. I spoke about Emily. I spoke about survival. I spoke about the moment when you finally understand that love without safety is not love. When I finished, several women approached me with tears in their eyes. One said, "Hearing you makes me feel less crazy." Another said, "I thought I was alone." In that moment, I understood why Emily wrote what she did. Our story was not meant to end in silence. It was meant to save someone else. Over time, I became an advocate not because I felt brave, but because I finally understood the strength in vulnerability. I joined task forces, spoke to lawmakers, and helped hospitals improve the way they screen for domestic violence. Each step forward felt like reclaiming a piece of my own life. Each step felt like honoring Emily. Sometimes at night, I still hear her voice from that voicemail, so fragile and so brave. But now, when it echoes through my memory, it does not shatter me. It reminds me why I keep going. It reminds me why I fight. It reminds me why truth matters even when it is painful. And so, if you are listening to my story now, wherever you are, whatever time it is, I want to leave you with this. If something feels wrong in your home, if someone controls your voice, your steps, your breath, trust that feeling. Trust the instinct that whispers, "This is not love." You are not imagining it. You are not weak. You are not the problem. There are people who will believe you. There are people who will fight for you. And if you cannot speak yet, if fear still holds your tongue, then hold on to this truth. Surviving is an act of courage. Telling someone is an act of rebellion. And walking away is an act of victory, even if it feels like defeat at first. I learned that freedom does not come the moment the abuser is gone. It comes the moment you begin to see yourself without their shadow. It comes the moment you realize you deserve safety. It comes the moment you take the first step toward a life that belongs only to you. Emily never got that chance. But I did. And if my voice can reach you now, then maybe her voice can reach through me. Maybe her story will save someone else the way it saved me. So please, if you feel unsafe, speak to someone. Call someone. Tell someone. You are not a burden. You are not alone. And this world needs you here. Healing is possible. Justice is possible. Life after fear is possible. I am living proof. If you have stayed with me through this entire journey, then hear me clearly now, because this may be the most important part of everything I have shared. If you are living with fear, pretending it is normal, if you are shrinking your voice so someone else can feel powerful, if you are constantly walking on eggshells, hoping today will be different, please understand this truth. Silence does not keep you safe. Compliance does not keep you safe. Hoping someone will change does not keep you safe. What keeps you safe is the moment you decide you deserve better than survival mode. I know how hard that moment is. I know how heavy the shame feels, how loud the self-doubt becomes, how impossible it seems to imagine a life beyond fear. I know because I lived in that darkness for years, believing I was the problem, believing danger was my responsibility to contain. But if my story means anything, let it mean this. You are allowed to want more. You are allowed to ask for help. You are allowed to step into the light, even if your legs shake. You are allowed to rebuild your life, even if the pieces feel too shattered to hold. There are people who will believe you. There are people who will listen without judgment. There are people who will stand beside you when you cannot stand alone. And if you do not feel strong enough yet, that is all right. Strength is not something you wait for. It is something you grow. One breath, one truth, one step at a time. If you see the signs of control, manipulation, or fear in someone you love, do not look away. Do not convince yourself it is not your place. Sometimes the smallest act of reaching out becomes the beginning of someone else's freedom. Sometimes one question, "Are you safe?" becomes the lifeline they have been waiting for. And if you are the one who needs that lifeline, I am telling you right now, it exists. You matter. Your life matters. Your story matters, even if someone tried to convince you otherwise for years. Do not wait for the perfect moment to leave or the perfect plan to form. There is no perfect moment. There is only the moment you choose yourself. And if you choose it today, then today becomes the first day of the rest of your life. If my voice reached you, if Emily's story woke something inside you, then share this message with someone who may need it. Drop a comment telling me where you are listening from and what time it is. And if you have a story of your own, know that you are safe to speak it here. Remember this above everything else. You are not alone. You are not trapped. You are not powerless. The future is still yours to claim.